Shadows of eternal dawn, the prophecy of ashes. Before the first kings carved crowns upon their brows, before men built their walls against the wild, the world was not quiet, it was alive with storms. Oceans clawed at the land, swallowing coastlines and spewing them forth again. Mountains thrust upward, jagged and raw, like the spines of some titanic beast. Fire split the skies, lightning clawed through clouds, and the earth trembled beneath forces unshackled. In valleys where lava once roared, forests now drank the ash. In canyons carved by ancient rivers, wind sang through bones of beasts that had never known a name. The air itself carried memory salt from drowned continents, cinders from long-dead peaks, and the taste of rain that had fallen before any human eye looked up to meet it. In that primal chaos, the first civilizations rose. They lit their fires against the night and sang songs that dared to reach the heavens. They pressed symbols into clay and etched star maps onto stone, promising themselves that order could cage the wild. They crowned their dead with copper circlets and sent them downriver on wooden rafts, certain that the water would carry souls somewhere gentle. For all their glory, they were fragile. For in the deep places of the earth, behind veils of basalt and beds of sleeping quartz, something stirred. A darkness older than stars, patient and waiting, watching mankind's ambition with silent hunger. The prophets of that age trembled when they spoke of it. Draped in ashes and smoke, they whispered the same words. When fire forgets its warmth and burns only to consume, the shadow will rise to claim the dawn. They scratched the warning into the undersides of temple lintels so it would not frighten kings. They hid it inside lullabies so children would remember it without knowing why. They painted it beneath layers of gold leaf so that when the gold flaked with time, the truth would stare through. The omen. And then the sky bled. A comet, vast and red, tore across the heavens. For nights uncounted, it burned like a wound above the world, staining seas with crimson reflection, casting fields in an unholy glow. Sailors lost their north. Shepherds found their flocks staring up, forgetting to graze. Priests and seers called it an omen. Kings laughed, feasting beneath its light, raising jeweled cups to prove that power could not be threatened by skyfire. Farmers whispered prayers, fearing their crops would wither. Midwives tied red threads around the wrists of newborns to trick the comet into thinking blood had already been paid. But in the barren deserts, where sandstorms buried the bones of empires long forgotten, a wanderer uncovered something far more dangerous than superstition. Half buried in the sand lay an obsidian shard, jagged and black, yet pulsing faintly with an inner glow. It hummed like a vein beneath stone, a heartbeat with no body. When touched, it whispered, not in words, but in hunger. Dreams near it soured. Wells turned bitter. Dogs howled at noon. Those who lingered near it dreamed of endless night, of cities without dawn, of oceans asleep under a lid of ink. The shard's call spread like plague. Wars broke out for reasons nobody could name. Kingdoms faltered under banners that once rallied armies. Rivers swelled and drowned entire coasts as if the sea had remembered some ancient grievance. Crops withered in fields that once sang with life. The soil tasted of iron. The world teetered, an old ship in rising surf, and the prophecy awoke, the chosen of fate. Amid this storm of chaos, 5 lives scattered across continents were being drawn together, not by choice nor by chance, but by threads of destiny that even gods could not sever. The loom of events turned, and their names were pulled tight upon it. Kaelen the Exiled. Envisioned as Keanu Reeves, his face is carved with grief and frost. Once a prince of the northern kingdoms, heir to a frozen throne, he was betrayed by his own blood. Stripped of crown and kin, he wandered the icy wastes, surviving where no man should. In the hollow of betrayal, his heart became iron. He would never kneel again. His steps wrote a scripture across the snow inked in perseverance. footfall after footfall, under auroras that fluttered like torn silk. He learned the craft of silence, the law of the cold, and how to read the sky for storms that had not yet formed. Serenya of the Vale. Her visage takes form in Gal Gadot, eyes luminous as though reflecting worlds unseen. Born in the southern jungles, where roots twist around temples older than history, she was marked from childhood by visions. Spirits of rivers whispered to her. Storms bent at her call. She alone saw the comet not as a star, but as a wound in the sky. In dreams she walked its shadow, and in waking she trembled at what was to come. Leaves lifted where she stepped. Dragonflies swiveled to watch her pass. She gathered herbs at moonrise and laid them in patterns the elders could not decipher. As if she were translating a language the world had forgotten it spoke. Tarran of the Ashblades. Wrought in the likeness of Brad Pitt, his jaw set like stone, his gaze sharp with the memory of countless battles. A mercenary commander, leading 1,000 killers for coin, he carved his legend upon the corpses of kings. Yet, beneath the blood and steel, he carried a weight of guilt that gold could never wash away. He did not fight for honor, nor for peace, but because war was the only language he understood. He could look at a field and tell you how it would sound when men died upon it. He could smell ambush the way others smelled rain. His sleep came in shallow sips, always interrupted by the clatter of a sword against a shield that wasn't there. Iskandar, the Nomad King. Embodied by Dwayne, the Rock Johnson, towering and unyielding, his voice thundered like drums of war. He commanded the tribes of the endless desert, uniting them not by bloodline, but by survival. His people saw him as unbreakable, a mountain of flesh and will. Yet in secret, he longed not for conquest, but for rest, a place where his children could grow without the shadow of war. He knew every star that rose above the dunes, and the old names of winds that could strip a horse to bone. When he laughed, the tents around him seemed to breathe easier. When he frowned, sand went still. Alira, the keeper of flames. Her form envisioned as Charlize Theron, ageless and resolute. She carried the last relic of the heavens, a lantern bound with chains of silver, within which burned the eternal flame. Legend said it was stolen from the gods, a spark of the first dawn itself. If that flame died, the world's light would follow. She bore it alone, hunted by kings who sought its power, worshipped by pilgrims who called her saint, but in truth she was neither. She was weary, and yet she endured. The lantern's light was gentler when she sang, harsher when she wept, and it made shadows behave like penitent thieves around her ankles. Together, though strangers to one another, they were already bound. Fate wove them into a circle, a covenant written long before they were born. They would be known, in time, as the Circle of Dawn, not because they loved the light, but because they were willing to enter the dark to save it. The first tremors of war. Beyond the veil of mortal eyes, the shard of shadow found its master. From the abyss it called forth a vessel, a man who had once been mortal, now hollowed and remade. Morvath the Eternal. In a twist of destiny, his form is imagined as Tom Cruise, yet transformed, clad in armor blacker than night, his eyes burning with void fire. Once a conqueror seeking immortality, he had merged with the shard itself. No longer man, no longer bound by death, he rose as the embodiment of the shadow's hunger. His breath cooled torches. His footsteps taught stone how to shiver. Legions answered his call. Not soldiers of flesh and blood, but horrors born of smoke and silence, twisted echoes of men long dead. They marched without fear, without pain, without end. Fields that had learned the weight of harvest, learned the weight of marching shadows. Wells reflected only the sky, never the faces peering in. Kingdoms faltered, cities burned. Bells rang once, and then forgot why they had been cast. And in the silence after each battle, the whispers of the prophecy grew louder. When fire forgets its warmth and burns only to consume, the shadow will rise to claim the dawn that trembled. The world now stood upon the knife's edge of destiny. Across the frozen north, Kaelen sharpened his blade, each strike ringing with the oath of vengeance. In the jungles, Serenya gazed skyward, her lips trembling with prayers no god answered. In the war camps, Tarran drank from cups of blood and steel, each night dreaming of the faces of the dead. Iskandar rode beneath a sun that scorched the desert, his people's chants echoing behind him like thunder. And Alira, alone in her temple of ruin, watched the flame flicker, whispering to it as if it were a child she must keep alive. The comet burned above them, casting the world in its crimson wound. Frost glittered like ground glass upon Kaelen's gauntlets. Frogs in the jungle sang out of season for Serenya. Tarran's campfires hissed without smoke. Iskandar's camels refused a familiar path and chose a new one without knowing why. Alira's lantern made dust motes fall in spirals, like tiny galaxies forgetting how to spin. The war of shadows had not yet begun, but already the world shuddered. The circle was not yet formed, but already destiny carved their names into eternity. The prophecy was awakening. And soon dawn itself would tremble, the rise of heroes. Kaelen the Exiled, the frost of betrayal. In the far north, where winds howl like wolves and mountains pierce the clouds, lives Kaelen the Exiled. His image burns in the mind's eye as Keanu Reeves, silent, sharp, his face hardened by years of wandering solitude. Once he was heir to the throne of the Northlands, beloved by his people, destined to rule with a heart tempered by both justice and iron. But betrayal carved his fate. On the night of winter's longest shadow, his kin turned against him. His brother, hungering for power, spilled blood in the palace halls. Footsteps echoed on snow, as if the castle itself were running away. Soldiers stormed his chambers. Crown and title were stripped from him. They cast him into the frost, leaving him to die beneath the aurora's cold fire. The stars witnessed and said nothing. But Kaelen did not die. Snow buried his footprints, but vengeance carved his soul. He learned to trap warmth inside the layered weave of silence and patience. He wandered the tundra, feeding on roots, sheltering in caves where ice daggers dripped ceaselessly, counting time by the rhythm of water that dared to remain liquid. Wolves circled, but he slew them with stolen blades and thanked their bodies for the lesson. Each scar became a vow, each frozen breath a promise. He studied the wind for messages, and the wind loved having secrets again. When word of the comet reached him carried in the cracked lips of a traitor who had nearly died to bring the news, Kaelen sharpened his sword against a glacier's edge. The world was unraveling, and he had nothing left but vengeance and perhaps destiny. Serenya of the Veil, the mystic's burden. In the southern jungles, vast and tangled like the braids of the gods, dwells Serenya of the Veil, envisioned in the elegance of Gadot. Her eyes shimmer as though painted by lightning. Vines leaned into her path like courtiers. Parrots stuttered when she looked up, as if remembering older tongues. From childhood, she was marked. While others slept, she dreamed of storms speaking in riddles. Spirits of rivers gathered at her steps, whispering secrets of things unseen. By 16, her visions became unbearable glimpses of battles unending, shadows swallowing suns, the red comet bleeding endlessly above the earth. She wrote circles within circles on temple steps until the patterns made elders uneasy. Her tribe revered her as touched by the divine, but Serenya knew the truth. Her gift was not blessing, but burden. The spirits did not comfort. They warned. They showed her the shard's hunger, the abyss stirring awake. Her hands shook when the monsoon refused to arrive, and steadied when it finally came in a single sheet that looked like a god had tilted a lake. One night, lightning struck her temple. Fire raced across carved stone, and in the blaze she saw a circle, not of stone, but of faces. 5 figures unknown to her, yet bound by fate. She knew then her path was no longer to walk among her people. It was to follow the storm, wherever it carried her. She left with only a staff, a pouch of dried leaves, and a wordless promise to the jungle that she would return it a dawn worth keeping. Barefoot, she stepped from the jungle's heart, the spirits swirling in her wake. Tarran of the Ash Blades, the mercenaries' guilt. Far to the east, smoke rises daily from battlefields. There, under banners torn and stained, marches Tarran of the Ash Blades, imagined as Brad Pitt rugged, scarred, his gaze carrying the weight of 1,000 slain. He kept his beard because blood was less visible in it. He kept his distance because mercy could travel that far and no further. He was once a farmer's son, but war carved that life away. As kingdoms clashed, he learned to wield a blade before he could read a prayer. He became a commander, not by noble birth, but by rivers of blood spilled in his name. Fields where he had once chased crickets now hosted drills where men learned how not to cry out. They call his army the Ash Blades, for wherever they fight, nothing remains but ruin and ash. Tarran tells himself he fights for coin, that gold justifies slaughter. Yet in the silence of night, when the screams of the fallen echo in his dreams, he knows the truth. He does not fight for wealth. He fights because war is all that remains of him. He keeps a ledger of the dead in his head, numbers nobody asks for, but that the soul insists on balancing. When the comet rose, kings begged him to fight beneath their banners. But the shard's whispers crawled into his camp like cold fog. Soldiers turned on soldiers. Nightmares plagued the restless, and a darkness spread even through hardened killers. For the first time, Tarran feared not for himself, but for his men. He sought answers, and unknowingly, he too stepped onto the road of destiny. Iskandar the Nomad King, the Desert Storm. In the endless desert, beneath suns that burn like judgment, rides Iskandar the Nomad King, his form envisioned in the unbreakable strength of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. His shadow at noon was a short, fierce thing. His shadow at dawn looked like a promise. Born with nothing, he rose to lead everything. Tribes fractured by centuries of feud bent knee to him, not out of fear, but respect. His presence was a mountain. His will, a storm. Under his command, caravans grew into legions, and oases flourished into cities. He learned to make water keep a secret until nightfall. He could read dune crests like a general reads maps, and a child's tears like a father reads weather. Yet Iskandar's heart bore a secret ache. He longed for peace, for a land where his children could grow without blades at their throats, where his people could build, not just survive. He listened for laughter in the pauses between drums, and when he heard it, he looked away so no one would see his eyes close in gratitude. But peace is fragile in the desert. Whispers of the comet reached his ears. Merchants spoke of cities falling to unseen armies. Priests brought visions of fire swallowed by shadow. His people begged him to protect them. And so he gathered his banners, sharpening spears beneath the desert sun, knowing that the war to come would demand more than strength. It would demand sacrifice. Elira, the keeper of flames, the eternal burden. And in the west, within a temple of ruin, dwells Elira, keeper of flames, embodied in the solemn grace of Charlize Theron. Columns broken at half height stood around her like teeth of a god that had tried to speak and failed. Her sandals left prints that glowed for a heartbeat on flagstones. For centuries, her order guarded the eternal flame, a fire said to be stolen from the dawn of creation itself. Kings sought it, conquerors coveted it, but the flame remained bound in silver chains, carried only by one chosen keeper. Now Elira is the last. Her sisters are gone, names soothed into silence by the same lullaby she now hums to the lantern. Alone she bears it, cradling the light as though it were a fragile child. Each night the flame flickers. Each night she wonders if it will die, and with it, the world's light. She learned which oils it liked, which songs softened its temper, which memories made it shine like a festival, and which made it watchful like a sentry. The lantern had moods. The lantern had a will. But it had chosen her, and she would not betray that trust. But she does not falter, for though her body grows weary, her spirit remains unbroken. She whispers to the flame, "Burn for them. Burn for all who cannot." The circle converges. Destiny is not a line, but a web. And as kingdoms fell, these 5 threads began to weave toward one another. Kaelen, wandering south from the frozen wastes, heard of a mystic seeress whose visions matched his nightmares. Serenya, guided by spirits, followed storms that led her to the edge of war camps without ever letting her feet touch trampled grass. Tarran, restless with guilt, sought purpose beyond gold and found himself staring too long at horizons. Iskandar marched to the borders, where desert met jungle, sensing a tide he could not stop alone. Kandalira, flame flickering, walked from her temple into the world, knowing her burden must be shared. They did not meet as friends. They did not meet as allies. They met as weather systems collide. Cold and heat, rain and dust, each bringing its own front of history. Blades drew the way hedgehogs raise spines instinct, not hatred. Suspicion hung heavy, but fate does not ask. Fate commands. In time, their paths converged, their battles aligned, and their destinies bound. They were the circle of dawn, though none of them yet accepted it. They camped in earshot, but not in sight. They stood back to back, without admitting that they were doing so. The first clash. Their first test came swiftly. A village, once vibrant, lay silent. Houses burned, corpses littered the earth, shadows writhed among the ruins like pieces of night that had forgotten their place. Fences half-melted leaned like drunks. A well rasped as if it had a throat. Kaelen charged, frost trailing his blade, an arc of winter slicing a summer evening. Serenya summoned storms that split the sky, a clean white wound through cloud. Tarran's mercenaries roared, cutting through horrors of smoke, shields overlapping like scales. Iskandar's voice thundered commands, rallying the broken into a shape that could survive. Alira held the lantern high, its light searing creatures that shrieked at its touch, the sound of paper burning magnified to agony. The battle was chaos steel against shadow, lightning against smoke, prayer against appetite. They did not fight as one. They fought as 5 scattered storms. Kaelen's frost froze an alley. Serenya's rain flooded it. Tarran's men slipped and learned to kill on knees. Iskandar hauled 3 at a time to their feet. Alira's light turned the puddles to mirrors in which shadows refused to look. Yet still, the tide broke before them. When silence returned, when the last shadow fell, the survivors looked upon them not as strangers, but as saviors. And for the first time, they realized the prophecy was not a warning, it was a command. Thus the circle of dawn was forged not by choice, but by the fire of necessity. For the shadow had risen, and the world would burn if they did not stand together. The war of shadows. The world had trembled beneath omens. The comet still bled in the sky, an open wound that would not heal. Shadows whispered, creeping from cracks in the earth, seeping into men's dreams, twisting their hearts. Now the whispers grew into roars. The age of prophecy had ended. The age of war had begun. The march of darkness. From the abyss, Morvath the Eternal rose. Envisioned in the likeness of Tom Cruise, but remade into something inhuman, he stood clad in obsidian armor that drank the light around him. In his chest pulsed the shard, the black heart of the abyss, binding his soul to shadow. His voice was thunder, his presence a storm, and his patience that of a glacier with a destination. He summoned legions not born of womb or flesh, but of nightmare. Warriors of smoke and bone, eyes glowing with void fire. Beasts twisted by hunger, Wings made of ash, claws of iron. Men slain in battle rose again. Their screams turned to silence, their wills bent to his command. Where his armies marched, the land died. Rivers blackened, forests withered. Cities emptied, leaving only echoes. Wheat forgot how to sway. Door hinges refused to squeal, out of respect or terror. This was not conquest. It was consumption. It was erasure practiced as strategy. The fractured kingdoms. The kingdoms of men were not ready. In the north, Kaelin's homeland fell to civil war. His brother, who had betrayed him, turned crown against crown, too blind to see the true enemy gathering at his gates. The heralds lost their voices. Decrees went unread. Snow soaked up red until it decided it had seen enough. In the south, Serenya's people prayed to spirits, but their temples burned before their gods could answer. Smoke's grammar grew more eloquent than scripture. Statues cried soot. In the east, kings begged Tarran and his mercenaries to hold the line, but gold could not buy salvation. Coins clinked with a guilty sound. Armorers forged without looking up. In the desert, Iskandar rallied his tribes, but even their thunderous chants could not drown out the whispers of the abyss. Drums broke their skins on purpose to stop being beaten for courage. And in the west, Alira's flame burned weaker with every shadow that spread. She carried it still, the last light of dawn, but she knew it would not last forever. She began rationing songs, saving the bright ones for days when the wind shook. The circle of dawn moved from battlefield to battlefield, but for every fire they extinguished, 10 more erupted. For every village they saved, 3 more fell. They were not an army. They were but 5 souls, facing an ocean of darkness. Yet oceans are frightened of cliffs, and the circle learned how to be stone. The Battle of Hollow Plains. Their first true stand came upon the hollow plains, a vast expanse of grasslands, now blackened with ash. Refugees fled, their cries carrying across the wind. Behind them, a shadow host stretched from horizon to horizon, a moving knight with teeth. Kaelen rode at the front, his blade glinting like frozen lightning. Keanu Reeves, grim and relentless, became a vision of vengeance. With every swing, frost trailed the air, searing the shadows that dared approach. His fury was not for glory, but for the throne stolen from him, for the kin who betrayed him, and for the world now collapsing. Where his horse-planted hooves, ice blossomed and then shattered under the sheer heat of war. Beside him rode Iskandar, Dwayne Johnson, towering above the battlefield like a mountain in motion. His voice thundered commands to the desert tribes who followed him, their spears flashing like stars beneath the crimson sky. They struck with unity, their chants shaking the ground, breaking the tide of nightmares that surged forward. He rode figures into being out of chaos, a wedge here, a wall there, until fear itself forgot which direction it was running. In the storm above, Serenya lifted her hands. Gadot, radiant with mystic power, called the spirits of air and storm. Lightning split the sky, burning through swarms of winged horrors. Thunder rolled like war drums, scattering the enemy ranks. She was not warrior, but tempest, a storm given flesh. Rain fell in sheets, so precise they avoided friendly fires and filled only the enemy's footprints with drowning. Tarran led his mercenaries into the thickest slaughter. Pitt, his face smeared with blood and ash, roared commands as steel clashed with claws. His men fought not for coin now, but for survival. War drums pounded, blades flashed, and still they held the line, even as the tide threatened to drown them. He traded formations like gamblers trade luck, losing and winning and losing again, until the enemy realized it could not understand a man who no longer gambled with his soul. And in the center stood Alira. Charlize Theron, solemn, unyielding, lifted the chained lantern. Its flame burned brighter than the comet, searing shadows to ash. Wherever she walked, men rallied, shadows screamed, and hope flared. Yet with every burst of light, her strength waned. She carried not only the flame, but the burden of its survival. Her hands blistered and healed and blistered again, the skin remembering the lesson quicker than the pain could teach it. The battle raged for days. The grasslands became oceans of corpses. Rivers of blood carved trenches into the soil, and then regretted the geography they had made. Still, the circle fought, and in the end, they did not win, but they survived. Sometimes survival is a victory the world is too proud to name. The siege of Blackwater Steppes knew. Before they could breathe, the circle rode to the Blackwater Steppes, a limestone stair carved by a river so dark it mirrored the comet like a blade. Morvath's host came like flood. Kaelen froze the lowest terraces, forcing the enemy to climb slick death. Serenya boiled mist up from the river, a veil that blinded wings. Tarran's archers used echoes to count volleys when sight failed. Iskandar held the highest landing, each step a vow that the next would not fall. Elira lit pitch with a thought, painting the water with constellations of fire that burned without consuming. When dawn finally remembered to arrive, the enemy had lost the habit of standing. The fall of Kaelen. Survival was not enough. For even as the circle stood, the golden empire of Kaelen fell. Its obsidian fortresses, once unbreakable, crumbled. Its golden-armored legions, once unstoppable, were devoured by the shadow. Spires that touched the sky toppled. Palaces became tombs. The empire's heart, once radiant, beat no more. Libraries exhaled their last breath in a single flutter of burned pages. Fountains coughed steam and then silence. The circle arrived too late. From the hills, they watched as the capital burned, its towers collapsing into black smoke. Survivors screamed, drowned beneath a tide of horrors. Kaelen's fists clenched white upon his blade. Serenya wept, her visions fulfilled in ruin. Tarran cursed himself, knowing his mercenaries could not have stopped this tide. Iskandar roared, his voice breaking, for he saw children trampled beneath shadow. Elira held the flame high, but even its light could not pierce the abyss now consuming the empire. In that moment, they realized this war could not be won by armies. This was not a war of men against men, nor kingdoms against kingdoms. This was a war for the soul of the world, and the only hope lay not in victory upon battlefields, but in destroying the source, the shard itself. The turning tide, the war grew worse. Villages vanished in silence. Armies defected, their generals seduced by whispers of eternal life. Kings bent knee to Morvath, believing they could share in his immortality. Even nature turned. Forests twisted into nightmares. Rivers boiled with poison. Skies wept ash. Birds forgot songs and learned warnings. The circle of dawn became wanderers of despair. Wherever they went, they carried hope, yet hope was fragile, fleeting. Men rallied at their presence, but many died before dawn. The circle saved lives, but they could not save kingdoms. They became experts in triage for a world hemorrhaging futures. Kaelen grew colder, his vengeance burning away into grim resolve. Serenya grew weary, her visions tearing at her soul. Tarran grew restless, his guilt gnawing, his men dying one by one, each loss sharpening a blade he could not sheath. Iskandar grew burdened, his people starving, his tribes scattered like constellations ripped from the sky. Elira grew weak, her flame flickering, threatening to fade, and yet they did not break. A rope frays from the ends. They bound themselves tighter in the middle. The shadow unleashed. From his throne of bone and smoke, Morvath laughed. His legions swept across continents, his voice echoing in every dream. The shard pulsed within him, feeding on fear, growing stronger with every soul consumed. He was no longer man. He was shadow incarnate, eternal, unyielding. And then came the great truth whispered into the circleless ears. The shard cannot be destroyed upon the earth. To end it, you must descend into the abyss. The circle knew their path was set. They could not win this war by swords alone. They had to cut out the heart of the darkness, no matter the cost. But to do so, they would have to leave the world behind. Thus ended the War of Shadows, not with victory, but with survival. The Circle of Dawn had not defeated the darkness. They had only endured it. And now, to save what remained of the world, they would have to descend into the abyss itself. The Descent into the Abyss Expanded Edition. The world above was burning. Cities lay in ruins. Kingdoms crumbled. Armies bled into the soil. The comet still blazed across the sky. A scar of red that split heaven itself. But the Circle of Dawn no longer fought upon battlefields. They had chosen a darker path, a final desperate gamble. For whispers had revealed the truth. The Shard of Shadow, the heart of Morvath's immortality, could not be destroyed upon the earth. To end it, they would have to descend into the abyss, the birthplace of shadows, the prison of forgotten gods, the wound at the world's core. So, beneath the shattered ruins of Kaelen, through catacombs that had slept for 1,000 years, they began their descent. Dust remembered hymns. Bones remembered laughter. The air remembered incense and tried, and failed, to smell like it again. The Gate of Silence. The entrance was no doorway carved by men. It was a rift in stone, jagged and endless, its edges bleeding with black mist. Torches sputtered and died when brought near, their flames devoured by the air itself. Only Alira's lantern burned, its silver chains trembling as if alive, resisting the pull of the abyss. The light pooled at their feet, and then dared to climb their calves. Charlize Theron, solemn and pale, held the flame high. The light clung to the circle's armor, fragile against the yawning dark. Kaelen stepped first, Keanu Reeves, his eyes hollow with frost. He did not fear the abyss, for betrayal had already stripped fear from him. Serenya followed, Gadot, her steps uncertain, her visions pulling at her mind like invisible claws. Tarran, Pitt, spat into the dark, gripping his blood-stained blade as if it were a compass. Behind him marched Iskandar, Dwayne Johnson, shoulders squared, voice steady, though his heart ached for the tribes he had left behind. The gate swallowed them whole, and silence fell. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a held breath that never ends. The descent, the abyss, was no cavern. It was a wound, a scar torn through the bones of the earth. Stairs of broken stone spiraled downward into blackness that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were slick with shadows that moved like living things, recoiling from Alira's flame, reaching again when the flame blinked. Hours became days. Days became a blur of timeless descent. Hunger gnawed. Water grew scarce. Sleep brought no rest-only visions, whispers, faces of the dead. The rhythm of footfalls turned to liturgy, the scraping of steel to lullaby. At last, even the sound of breathing felt borrowed. And then the trials began. Kaelen's trial, the betrayal reborn. In a chamber of mirrors, carved from ice, Kaelen stood alone. Frost gathered on his blade. Reflections surrounded him, his brother, his family, his kingdom. They smiled. They welcomed him. Crown in hand, they begged him to return. Even the ice breathed fog in relief at his arrival. For a heartbeat, he faltered. He had dreamed of this moment through every step in exile. To take back what was stolen. To feel warmth again, not only frost. He tasted bread that wasn't there, heard a child's giggle that had never been born, but the mirrors lied. He raised his sword and shattered them one by one, each strike echoing like thunder. His brother's smile turned to ash. His crown crumbled. Kaelen roared into the void. I was forged in exile. I will not be broken by longing. The words were not a speech. They were a ritual of refusal. The ice melted, and the abyss howled. Serenya's Trial, The Voices of Eternity. Serenya found herself upon a bridge of roots stretching across endless storms. Spirits swirled around her, whispering, screaming, calling her name. They promised peace if she surrendered. They promised power if she obeyed. The bridge swayed on syllables from mouths that had never learned to close. The storm grew louder until her mind nearly broke. She fell to her knees, covering her ears, tears streaking her face. For she had lived her entire life hearing voices, and now they screamed in unison. Words folded into words until meaning went blind. But within the storm came one voice, soft, clear, her mother's. "Child, you are not cursed. You are chosen." It arrived without thunder, and therefore outweighed it. Serenya rose. She opened her arms, and instead of resisting the storm, she embraced it. Lightning struck her chest, coursed through her veins, and did not consume her. The spirit screamed, but she stood firm. The bridge dissolved, and the abyss retreated, startled to find a human who could love what it used to frighten. Tarran's Trial, The Army of the Dead. Tarran walked into a battlefield that stretched to the horizon. Corpses covered the ground, their eyes hollow, their mouths silent. He knew them. Everyone, soldiers, kings, peasants, innocents. The dead he had slain for coin. Their armor still remembered the shape of fear. They rose one by one, swords drawn, their faces twisted in accusation. His mercenaries, too, appeared among the men he had led to their deaths. The sound of 1,000 blades leaving sheaths made the air thinner. For the first time, Tarran felt fear. Not of battle, but of judgment. He dropped his blade, falling to his knees. "I fought for gold. I fought for nothing. I am nothing." The thought landed with the heaviness of an anchor. The army closed in. But then, from the ranks of the dead, one face stepped forward, a young soldier he had once spared. The boy's presence was an answer to a question Tarran had not admitted he had asked. "You are more than blood. Fight and give meaning to the lives you took. The dead cannot speak, and yet meaning can." Tarran roared, seizing his sword. He charged into the dead, each strike a vow of redemption. The battlefield dissolved in flame. The flame did not need wood. It needed intention. Iskandar's trial, the choice of kings. The Nomad King stood before two visions. In one, his people thrived. Tribes united, children laughing, desert blooming. A kingdom of peace. But beside him, his companions lay dead, the circle broken. In the other, his companions stood alive, lantern burning bright, but his people suffered, enslaved, scattered, forgotten. The abyss whispered, "Choose." It sounded pleased to have made a trap with only 2 doors. Iskandar's heart shattered. Tears carved lines down his face. He could not abandon his people. He could not abandon his friends. He roared at the abyss, "I choose both." It was not a refusal of reality. It was a refusal of cruelty disguised as logic. The visions twisted, screamed, and shattered. The choice was false. His will had defied it. A third door appeared by existing in him all along. Illyra's Trial, the fading flame. At last came Illyra. She stood in a cavern where the lantern's flame dimmed. The abyss pressed close, shadows suffocating. She wept, clutching the silver chains, begging the flame to burn. For centuries she had carried it, but now her strength was failing. Her shoulders remembered weight even when they were empty. The shadows whispered, "Let it die. Rest. You have borne enough." The deceit of kindness wore a familiar face. Her knees buckled. The flame flickered. She saw her sisters, fallen, begging her to surrender. She almost did. But then faint voices rose from above. Children, villages, survivors, the countless souls who still looked to the dawn. They were calling to her, even if they did not know her name. Hope has a sound, and it is most often unintentional. Alira screamed, thrusting her hand into the flame itself. Fire seared her flesh, but she held it, fed it with her life. The lantern blazed brighter than ever, scattering the abyss like dust. She collapsed, but the flame burned on. Pain is not payment. It is proof. The heart of the abyss. The trials ended. The circle stood together, scarred, weary, but unbroken. Before them stretched a cavern vast as eternity, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor a sea of bones. And at its center, upon a throne of skulls, sat Morvath the Eternal. Tom Cruise, but no longer man. His body fused with the shard, his armor a living shadow, his eyes burning void fire. His presence made time fold its arms and wait. His voice was thunder, shaking the bones of the abyss. You are not heroes. You are children lost in night. This world is mine. The circle raised their blades, their flame, their storm. And the final battle began. The battle beneath the world. The abyss itself became their enemy. Shadows poured like rivers, swarming in endless waves. Kaelen fought with fury, frost trailing his strikes, carving paths through smoke. Serenya called storms underground, lightning tearing through stone until stalactites sang a brittle hymn. Tarran roared, his mercenaries rallying, their steel flashing with desperate defiance, their footfalls learning how to grip slick bone. Iskandar broke legions with his fists, his spear shattering armor, his voice summoning courage in the hearts of men who had forgotten their own names. Alira lifted the flame high, its light burning through the dark, drawing a circle around them that shadows could enter only to regret it. And against them, Morvath struck. His blade was a void, devouring steel. His voice bent soldiers' wills. His shadow form grew with every strike, towering above them, as though the abyss itself fought in flesh. The cavern shook. Stone collapsed. Rivers of molten fire erupted and crawled like serpents seeking purchase. The circle bled, screamed, fought, but still they endured. And thus, in the deepest wound of the world, the circle of dawn faced the eternal shadow. Not for kingdoms, not for crowns, but for the survival of dawn itself, the dawn eternal. Geometry of the underworld. The abyss opens like a cathedral, shattered and inverted. Pillars of basalt lean at impossible angles. Ribs of stone arch overhead, hung with teeth of glowing crystal that drip light like molten frost. The battlefield resolves into tears. The throne dais, a high, bone-white promontory, where Morvath the Eternal envisioned as Tom Cruise. Now a figure of living shadow stands fused to the shard. Obsidian veins radiate from his feet like black lightning into the rock itself. The maw, a circular trench encircling the dais, filled with slow, viscous fire that moves like thick blood, an ever-pulsing moat fed by the shard's beat. The galleries, 3 terrace shelves descending into darkness, each broad enough to host armies, each bridged by narrow spines of rock that crack and heal in rhythm with the shard. The sink, a sinkhole of churning ash and bone in the far distance, swallowing debris in a silent spiral, the battlefield's final drain. The circle of dawn spreads in a 5-point star at the lowest gallery, each point a storm unto itself. Opening gambit. The first movement is not a charge, but a choreography of force. Kaelen the Exiled, envisioned as Keanu Reeves, advances along the left flank, carving a glacial corridor. Every step drops the temperature. Vapor crystallizes midder. The frost grown beneath his boots builds a causeway that refuses to crack under the maw's heat. Frost blooms along shadow carapace, then fractures, leaving enemies brittle and slow. Iskandar the Nomad King, Dwayne Johnson, anchors the center right, executing hammer and anvil rotations with tribesmen and surviving spear lines. He turns bottlenecks into kill lanes, rotating bruised units behind stalwart shields, inhaling the shock of each wave and exhaling it as counterforce. His footwork reads like a map of desert circles of control expanding and contracting with drumbeat precision. Tarran of the Ashblades. Brad Pitt drives a wedge assault straight at the first stone spine, bridging the maw. Shields overlap, blades angle low for tendon cuts against shadow beasts, whose anatomies keep changing, but still obey leverage. Archers behind him loose by heartbeat count, not by shouted orders knock, draw, release. Breathe until arrows sketch constellations that stitch the air shut. Serenya of the Vale, Gadot, widens the sky underground. She pulls a cyclone through vents in the cavern roof, shaping wind as a sculptor shapes clay. Vortex shears peel winged horrors out of formations. Static crowns crisp their edges mid-flight. Each flash leaves ghosts of their own shadows on rock, a sepia ledger of what has been unmade. Illyra, keeper of flames, Charlize Theron, advances last, holding the eternal lantern like an oath that cannot be reneged. Light spills from the silver chains in concentric ripples. Radiance pulses, timed to the shard's heartbeat. When the shard beats, her light hammers back, a counter-rhythm teaching the abyss a different song. The first 100 heartbeats favor the circle. The abyss recoils, like an organism surprised that prey resists digestion. The galleries ring with steel and storm. The maw's fire brightens in insult. Morvath's counter-pattern. Morvath answers not with mass, but with structure. The abyss learns. He splits the field with oblivion banner sheets of darkness, planted into the stone that refuse all light. Under their shade, shadows thicken, speed doubles, and wounds refuse to behave like wounds. He seeds the galleries with void ruptures, holes that are not holes, which swallow momentum and spit it elsewhere. A spear thrust on one terrace reappears behind its owner. A sprint forward becomes a stumble sideways into the maw's rim. He breathes, and null winds flow. Serenya's cyclone falters, lightning drawn into his chest like threads to a needle. The storm does not die. It shortens its breath. The circle adjusts. Kaelen abandons broad frost fields and shifts to micro-freeze-thin plates under key enemy joints. Ankle locks for creatures that do not have ankles until the instant the plates appear. Iskandar flips formations into spiral phalanxes, moving like screws into the belly of a tide, converting frontal pressure into circular glide-off. Spears strike at oblique angles, bodies interlock, footsteps pattern out the word endure in a language the abyss cannot read and therefore cannot counter. Tarran uses the void ruptures on purpose. He mirrors timing, throws feints into ruptures, so they reappear as back thrusts. He sacrifices position for leverage, turning loss into surprise. Serenya lowers the sky to the floor-grounded lightning, crawling across basalt in blue veins, forcing the enemy to cross thresholds that erase them from the ankles up. Illyra changes pulse rate, syncopating the lantern's light. Morvath anticipates the heartbeat. She teaches him jazz. The field equalizes. Advantages become narrow. Every gain draws blood in a currency none can afford. The maw crossing. To end the war, the dais must be reached. The maw must be crossed. Kaelen lays ice-stepping stones across liquid fire discs no wider than a shield, each one born from a slash that leaves the scent of ozone and winter. They last only as long as a breath. Timing becomes religion. Tarran leads the crossing. Shields up. 2 steps, pivot, brace. Every third soldier flips his shield backward to catch a splash of flame and fling it away like liquid glass. Iskandar throws chain bridges links looped to links, each end anchored to a living man, not to stone. The bridge breathes. It does not break where bridges should break, because it refuses the category of bridge. Serenya draws heat out of the maw in thermal drafts that pillar into the roof, creating corridors of survivable air. Steam curtains rise, searing but navigable. Within them, Enemy silhouettes bloom and vanish, confused by refraction. Alira locks the root with sanctum light. For 10 heartbeats at a time, the maw becomes quiet, as if remembering a time before it burned. They gain the first stair of the dais. A battlefield narrows to a funnel. Morvath descends. The Titan exchange. At close quarters, the war becomes a language of impacts. Morvath's blade, a strip of condensed night, devours heat and meaning on contact. The first sweep removes the history from Kaelin's sword runes fade. Heritage evaporates. Kaelen peeps the metal and uses will as inscription instead. Iskandar meets a downward strike with crossed forearms wrapped in chain. Shock ripples through him and out into the floor. Stone splits. Men regain footing. The shock becomes gift. Tarran's wedge implodes into paired dueling rings. 2 steps of space per fighter. Knives out, elbows tight, every cut a diagram. He bleeds slow to bleed long. He stations himself where others would be. Serenya goes vertical. She turns stalactites into conductors, leaping charge from spire to spire until the air sings like a choir of metal. Each strike on Morvath's armor blooms into cracks that close too quickly, but not quickly enough. Alira advances 1 pace at a time. Light does not rush. Light arrives. Each arrival burns a decade of shadow from Morvath's surface. The decade grows back in a heartbeat less 1 second. The stalemate is measured not in yards, but in seconds denied and seconds earned. Both sides feel the edge of limits. Limits respond by moving. Kaelin's stand. When the blade of night punches through Kaelin's chestplate, the sound is less steel and more season-changing. He does not fall backward. He steps into the wound, trapping the blade between ribs, denying it the space to be withdrawn. With his left hand, he drives the shattered hilt into an armor seam already bruised by Serenya's strikes. The ice he calls now is not cold. It is stillness molecular obedience. The frozen seam cries. A crack radiates like frost across a window just before dawn. Kaelin's body goes slack, but his angle remains, a geometry that keeps the wound open for someone else's use. Serenya's overdrive. She reads the fracture like a map. Lightning funnels through her spine, shoulders, wrists. She chooses frequency over amplitude many strikes, thin as harp strings, sawing at the crack, each one finishing before Morvath can null it. Her blood weeps from eyes and ears. The floor fizzes where it lands. She shifts to counter-oscillation, timing her pulses to the sub-beat under Morvath's heartbeat, the one the shard uses to keep score. The crack becomes a fault. The cavern brightens to the color of endings. When she collapses, the smell of rain remains, a promise left in air. Tarran's redemption push. He sees the fault and commits everything that is left. He calls a box formation around the wound 8 shields, 4 angles, 2 layers. His sword plunges low, tight, twisting not to pierce, but to leverage the fault wider. Morvath's gauntlet hammers his chest. Ribs yield like doors kicked inward. Breath leaves and does not return. Still the sword turns, a key in a lock that has resisted opening since the world learned fear. When Tarran crumples, the fault yawns. Space has been purchased. Iskandar's breakers roar. With no spear left, he wraps chain around fists and becomes kinetic doctrine. Every strike lands not where Morvath is, but where Morvath is about to be predictive violence, born of a lifetime reading sandstorms. A jaw of shadow fractures, a clavicle of night splinters, a thigh of smoke remembers bone and resents the memory. He eats a cut across the chest and chooses to remain upright through decision alone. The chain in his hands glows from friction. When he finally drops to one knee, the dais trembles as if it too must acknowledge effort. Alira's apotheosis. The lantern has waited. The moment arrives. She does not hurl it. She joins it. The silver chains coil on our arms like living script, the flame stepping from metal into flesh as a tenant choosing a kinder house. Light threads through her sternum, ribs, heart. Every scar becomes a window. She walks no faster than before, no slower, until the lantern's mouth meets the fault in Morvath's chest. What follows is not combustion. It is correction. Darkness that believed itself infinite is reintroduced to scale. The shard tries to flee and finds that it inhabits only itself. Alira's light folds around it, not as prison, but as context. The shard guesses the word dawn and gets the pronunciation wrong. It unravels trying to say it right, the unmaking of a throne. When Morvath ends, the end is quiet first. Armor sloughs into soot. The dais shrinks as bone remembers it was taken without asking. The maw gutters. Fire lowers itself to a respectful height and then goes out. The galleries exhale. Stalactites release held breath in gentle sleet. The abyss cave does not explode. It concludes. Roof plates settle. Rifts zip shut with threads of light left behind by Alira's passing. The sink swallows what remains with the politeness of a host clearing a table. On the floor, a lantern, chains cooling to dull silver, flame steady and small, the way a hearth flame looks after guests have gone home. Around it, still forms Kaelen on his back, frost fading from eyelashes. Serenya on her side, hands open as if cradling thunder that has run ahead. Tarran face down, sword still half turned in final insistence. Iskandar kneeling, head bowed, a statue the desert will someday copy in sand. The shard is absent. The absence is a clean shape. Above, the comet begins to thin, color washing from wound to scar to story. The long ascent, there is no triumphal climb. The survivors who remain begin a procession not of victory, but of return. Stretchers fashioned from cloak and spear. Torches rekindled from Alira's lantern, their flames modest and obedient. Footsteps count time again. Where the gate of silence once drank light, it now permits it. The black mist is gone, replaced by cool air that smells of old rain. The catacombs of our Kaelen hum with distant water. The world above waits, unaware that it has been allowed to continue. On the surface, dawn arrives not as spectacle, but as permission. Birds attempt song and achieve it on the second try. Markets remember how to open. Doors decide to remain hinges and not mouths. 4 funerals and a vigil. The Northlands receive Kaelen on a bier of fur and ice. Snow falls in coins rather than flakes, round and heavy, stacking on his chest like offerings. The exile returns not to reclaim a throne, but to release it from meaning. Songs are low, wide things, sung with mouths mostly closed, the way northerners keep heat. Statues are carved, but they are placed in crossroads, not palaces, so that choices must look at him while being made. The jungles claim Serenya. Vines lace a canopy over a pool gone, still to become mirror. Her body rests on a raft of living roots that choose not to drink. Lightning blooms once, with no storm to sponsor it. Children trail fingers in the water and feel a tingle that teaches them respect without fear. The elders hang wind chimes that ring only when the air is honest. The eastern marshes take Tarran home to soil that never forgot him. The ash blades dissolve their company. Ledgers are burned in a measured fire that counts each page with a sigh. On a hill where he once practiced footwork with stones for enemies, a simple marker stands no heraldry, only a notch cut by a hand that had learned too much about blades. The deserts keep Iskandar in motion, even in stillness. His body is set upon a traveling shrine, an ox cart made of cedar and memory, so that every tribe can add a ribbon, a bead, a story. The caravan never stops. His burial becomes a route that redraws maps, a pilgrimage without end that turns borders into places where people share water. The west holds Alira's lantern in the ruins that no longer feel ruined. The flame remains small and sufficient. A watch is set, but it is not grim. Pilgrims arrive with quiet footsteps, and the first rule written at the gate is short. Do not ask the flame for anything it has not already given. The second rule is shorter. Stay a while. The world learns itself, seasons correct. Rivers return to banks they chose long ago and then forgot. The sky stops bruising. Clouds remember their first purpose. Farmers plant and feel the ground answer with a thrum that might be gratitude. Blacksmiths find that steel once more wants to be tools first, weapons later. In libraries, marginal notes appear in books that never had them, scribbles of unknown hands, reminding readers to breathe. In temples, echoes lose their edge. In taverns, laughter is louder than clatter. Merchants haggle with more sincerity than precision. Judges sleep better. None of this is miraculous. It is possible. The quiet continuation. Legends spread as legends must. Ballads turn names into chords, then into keys for doors nobody knew were locked. Painters fail to capture the lantern's glow and fail beautifully. Stonemasons carve the circle as a ring of stars that touch but do not overlap. Children play circle and shadow in alleys, running in patterns that accidentally invoke protection. Centuries from now, scholars will argue over where the abyss truly was, whether the comet was a comet at all, whether the eternal flame was metaphor. These arguments will be safe to have because someone paid for them. And at the edge of a western ruin, a lantern burns. Not bright, not dim, exactly as needed. Night arrives each day and departs on schedule. Dawn keeps its appointment because someone showed it how. In some winters, the wind over the northlands will carve a sound that resembles the grate of a sword twisting in armor. In some summers, the jungle frogs will time their chorus to a heartbeat under thunder. In some springs, the desert will choose a single dune and hold it still for an entire day. In some autumns, an archer in the east will draw and feel, for a breath, the weight of a command that is no longer his to carry, and smile anyway. If shadows ever gather again, and they will, because forgetting is part of living, the world will remember this. Light does not win by blinding the dark. It wins by remaining when the dark is done. The lesson has been taught. The test has been passed once. It can be passed again. The camera of the mind recedes, leaving the lantern a small star at the center of all reasons. The flame leans once, as if acknowledging company, then resumes its steady posture, unimpressed by theatrics, absolute in function. The dawn is eternal, not because it cannot be broken, but because heroes dared to hold the flame against the abyss. This was their story, the story of the shadows of eternal dawn, dedicated to those who carry the light